And without further delay, we'll go ahead and kick into our first talk from Valerio. So he's going to talk a little bit about Prophet, which is a voice assistant that he has created for ChatGPT. And afterwards, we're going to talk a little bit about just what this space is looking like right now, and what Valerio's views are on the latest trends. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Valerio.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, Josh, thank you very much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to talk at the Audio Programmer Meetup, and yeah, to have like this very, very nice chats every time like with you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Prophet today, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the music AI space and some of the news. And there's loads and loads of interesting news right now. So regarding Prophet, so this is an application that came to my mind, I have to say, because of my childhood. So first of all, what is Prophet? Well, in two words, really, this is just like a sort of wrapper around ChatGPT. So it allows you to talk to ChatGPT instead of interfacing with ChatGPT through text. So you can talk to Prophet. Prophet is going to listen to what you say, is going to understand, hopefully, what you've just said, and then it's going to query ChatGPT through a library called RevChatGPT, and then it's going to use what you've said as a prompt to ChatGPT, and then some text is going to be generated. It just like comes back to Prophet, and then I use some text-to-speech sort of like library from Google text-to-speech to actually create a speech version of ChatGPT's response, and then you just like can hear what ChatGPT said. So in other words, I'm trying to turn ChatGPT into a voice assistant. Now, some of you like maybe wondering like what is ChatGPT? Well, I don't think like anyone really following like this meetup wouldn't know what ChatGPT is, but like in two words, this is a large language model AI system that's been trained by OpenAI, like the infamous AI company that's sort of like all the rage right now. And they used ChatGPT, they used GPT-3, 3.5 really, as a basis. And then they just like fine-tune it to have an artificial intelligence with which you can actually have a sort of dialogue. And it is extremely powerful. I've tried it, and I've tried it for a bunch of different things. So I've tried it to understand things myself, like quantum mechanics, or things that I didn't like recall because I wasn't looking at them since I was doing like my degree in physics, right? Or things like that. And it actually like came out like with answers that were really, really spot on. I've used it to ask it weird questions like what is creativity? So it's sort of like this sort of philosophical stuff. And it actually gave interesting results back, interesting thoughts, quite nuanced, quite articulated all around. So at that point, I realized, well, I've always had this childhood training, which is to talk to a non-human being, be that an animal or be that a machine, right? And now for the first time, I see a conversational AI that actually has some depth to it, right? While I was sort of interacting with it through text, I recognized for the first time that, I mean, there's really something here. So it's the level of like intelligence and knowledge that this AI is able to express is quite mind-blowing, I have to say. So, and as I said, this is a childhood dream because I've always been interested into not machine learning, but artificial intelligence and creativity since I was a child, really, right? And I think I was probably 11 years old when the big story about Deep Blue came out. And for the ones of you who are passionate about chess, probably you know that was like sort of like incredible milestone for human beings in general, for artificial intelligence in particular, because there was this match between the world chess champion Garry Kasparov, world chess champion of that time during the 90s. He was completely dominating chess. And this system built by IBM called Deep Blue. So they had a first match, and the first match, Garry Kasparov won. The second match, Deep Blue won. And that was an incredible result because 10 years before, 20 years before, it was just unthinkable to think that an AI system could actually beat the world chess champion. And so, in a sense, like there, I started to have this big passion for intelligent machines. And later on, this passion for intelligent machines moved into passion for machines that can be creative. And indeed, with the sound of the eye, like with my practice, research, and all of that, this is what I've been doing for like 15 years plus right now, right? So building machines that can be creative, especially in the music domain, right? And so, as I said, ChatGPT came out. I heard like all the buzz. I tried it, and I was like blown away by the result, really blown away. And so I thought, well, this is probably the right time to hack together a solution and finally have a conversation with an intelligent machine, or more or less intelligent machine, right? And so that's what I did with Prophet. So basically, I hacked together an application which is made up of 4 different components that allows me to talk, or that allows everyone who uses it to directly talk to ChatGPT. And for that, I haven't like built anything from scratch. Rather, it is more like a hack that puts together a bunch of third-party libraries that already exist for speech to text, text to speech, for audio playback, and all of this kind of stuff. So if you want, Josh, I can perhaps share my screen and guide you super quickly through the code, super quick. I don't know, like if this is something that you usually do.
Oh yeah, please
Okay.
show us code. We'd love to see it.
Okay, so let me share my screen real quick. Can you see my screen?
Yep, you're all good.
Great. So this is PyCharm. So the application is built in Python. And so there's a main entry point here that is this run function that sort of like, it's the entry level where you basically do all the different necessary things to interface with ChatGPT. So as you can see here, I initialize all the necessary objects, and these are all classes and wrappers around other third-party libraries, like in tools that I use. And so there's one called speech recognizer that it does what it says, right? It's just like a speech recognizer. Then we have another object called speech synthesizer, Google speech synthesizer, because as I said, I use Google text-to-speech. Then there's an audio player, I instantiate that, and I instantiate ChatGPT as well. So ChatGPT is an object that allows me to interface directly with ChatGPT, which is relatively difficult to do, I have to say, because unfortunately, OpenAI hasn't released yet an API to interface directly in a handy way with the algorithm. Rather, there are a bunch of hacks and libraries online that do that for you, but there's a lot of like safe things on OpenAI's to circumvent, and I found this one library called a Rev ChatGPT, which works like a charm. Even though it has downside, which is it changes quite a lot because it has to be updated based on the changes that OpenAI, of course, brings to its algorithm and its interface, right? Okay, so here we just have like the different objects, and now we just enter the conversation loop, okay? So we are in a while loop. So initially, we are in listening mode. So the speech recognizer listens to whatever you say. through this like method transcribe. So you say something, you say like a sentence, and then we get the text prompt through the speech recognizer. Then after that, the next step is to send the text prompt to ChatGPT, and we do that through this method called getResponse that accepts this text prompt as an argument, and then we get the response. Of course, the response is in text format, so now we need to synthesize the text format into speech that then we can play back, and for that we use the speech synthesizer. So we just call speech synthesizer.synthesize, we pass the text response, and we get back the audio format of this text response. And finally, we just play it back. Now, to give you just a little bit more information about like the inlets that I'm using here, so let me show you speech recognizer. I can get in here. And as you see here, I use this library called speech recognition. This is a library that I really suggest everyone's using if they want to play around with speech recognition in Python, because it's a wrapper around a lot of very handy and powerful speech recognition libraries like Whisper, like Google speech to text, and many, many others, right? So this class is just a wrapper around speech recognition, basically, right? And I think here we use, let me double check here. I think, yeah, we use Google speech to text as default here. So that's all there is here in this class. Then if we go back here, you can see this other class called Google Speech Synthesizer. And again, this is just another wrapper around Google Cloud text-to-speech. And yeah, you can see this class has this synthesize method, but under the hood, we're just using this synthesized speech from the Google Cloud text-to-speech client. That's all there is to it. And then we have this audio player, and for playing back audio, yeah, this is super straightforward. I just use audio segment from PyDub. Now, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this library, but if you're not, you should definitely check it out if you are a Python user, because this is super handy for all things music and audio processing. It allows you to add fade in, fade out, to segment, to manipulate audio like in many different ways. So yeah, remember to check PyDub out. It's a fantastic library. And finally, we have this ChatGPT, right? And as I said, this is a wrapper around RevChatGPT, which is this fantastic library that allows you to connect to ChatGPT. And you can find it easily on GitHub, and I think it's also available from PyPy. Yeah, it is available from PyPy because I have a TOML file here, and as you can see now, they've just released RevChatGPT version 0.1. Yeah, it's changing basically every day. Cool. So yeah, this is, as I said, like nothing really like fancy, but it is a nice toy. It is a nice toy that allows you to have this impression of talking to a somewhat, I can't say sentient being, because of course ChatGPT is not sentient, it's not artificial general intelligence, nothing like that, but still, it's kind of a weird feeling having a chat with this non-human being, because it's very articulate, because the answers that you get make usually a lot of sense. They're very well made, the arguments make sense, and it's not just like sort of like dry answers that you get. It's a lot of like reasoning, pros and cons, and things like that. And so with this little application, which by the way, you can get on my GitHub account. So you can go to my GitHub account, it's called Music Alchemist. And there's one repo among many that I have on my GitHub account. It's called Prophet. You can clone it, you can install it with Poetry on your machine, and you can play around with it. The setup is a little bit convoluted because you have to set up Google Cloud text-to-speech. You have to set up as well RevChatGPT with some sort of like session tokens and things like that, but I have a README that can help you just like navigate through this complexity. Now, yeah, I was saying, going back like to the sort of like goal of profit. As I said, it just like allowed me to have like these nice conversations with ChatGPT, and out of it, I also like made a video that I published, I think like yesterday on the Sound of AI YouTube channel, where I have this conversation with ChatGPT regarding all things like music creativity, machine intelligence, and AI, and the impact of AI on the music industry and this kind of stuff. And as I said, the answers that I got are quite sensible all around. I think I probably agree with 90% of what ChatGPT said. Apart from a couple of points which I cover in the video, but I want to mention one because that was a little bit hilarious, at least like for the people who are familiar with the music industry. So I asked ChatGPT, what do you think about the music industry and the advent of AI? Do you think the music industry is ready for this transformation? And ChatGPT said, yeah, I think more or less. The music industry and the different companies are ready for what's to come. And I mean, if you've been in the music industry for quite some time, you know that that isn't necessarily the case, because I mean, the industry is built up with a lot of like gigantic and very traditional companies that have a hard time already doing some basic digitalization, let alone sort of like adopting AI solutions and machine learning. So yeah, that was a little bit fun. But again, if you're familiar with ChatGPT, you should also know that ChatGPT isn't a source of truth. Rather, it is a large language model. So it can say things that sound truthful, but they're not. So this is not at all surprising. But regardless, the majority of the answers that I got were particularly interesting. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Valerio. That was very awesome, and I'm excited to check this out. For the people that are tuning in, if you have questions, please feel free to list them in the chat. In the meantime, I've got a million questions, and I'll try to summarize those down into a few. So the first question that I have is more generally, what do you think this means for the future of search? Do you feel that because of course these are contrasting approaches between how OpenAI is looking to deliver information versus, let's say, Google with search and providing you with a list of resources that attempt to answer your question in the most accurate way. So where do you foresee that this is going to go?
Yeah, in terms of search, I don't see that big of an issue, at least for now, for Google. First of all, because as I said, ChatGPT or similar language models are not necessarily truthful, right? So you can't really trust what they say. It's not a search algorithm by any stretch of the imagination. So it's going to create things that sound plausible, but they may not be. And there are a couple of reasons for this. So first of all, the goal of OpenAI wasn't to build a search system, but just like a generative model. And the second problem that we have is that ChatGPT has been trained on a database of information, dialogues, and stuff like that exists until 2021. So ChatGPT is completely oblivious about everything that has happened ever since. It doesn't know anything, for example, about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for example, right? So, and that doesn't make it as an ideal like search system. So, and there's a big but here, and the big but is that it may well be that in the near future, the goal of OpenAI or other similar companies will be to use this kind of technology with the goal of creating a conversational search engine. And that could be really cool. I think it's going to be a huge, huge challenge because it's difficult really to control sort of like the search and the search approach used by a system like ChatGPT, because it's just like generative, so you can generate whatever, right? And it's difficult just like to put filters and things like that because it's not simply searching through a database of items. It's completely different. It has this fantastic capacity to, which is a typical human capacity, and it's the pointer to intelligence, which is that of like looking at things and making connections and summarizing information coming from different sources, which is something that, of course, Google doesn't do. As you said, Google, all it does is just like tell you the things, the items that it thinks are the most relevant for your search, but there isn't any reasoning beyond that. So we are still at the level of information, not necessarily knowledge, where knowledge is the next step, which is, I argue, what ChatGPT does to a certain extent, which is just like extracting information from extracting like all the most important like points from the information and creating connections. And at that point, we have real knowledge. But in the process, given the whole algorithm is generative, you may create a lot of noise, and along with it, a lot of like fake information that you may think is just true, because to you, who may not be a domain expert for, say, for example, artificial intelligence or biology, everything sounds plausible.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any ideas or any thoughts on how OpenAI will look to iterate on this idea or on this problem that seems to be that it delivers the information as if it were true information, but in actuality it doesn't know whether it's true or not, and it could be false. Any ideas on where you think it could go from here?
I'm not positive that they will now look into that, because the sort of target application that they have is something completely different, right? So it's not, I believe, going against Google on their sort of like favorite like territory, which is like search, but rather doing other things that for which like ChatGPT or similar large language models are quite unique. Like, for example, like taking text and creating like summaries like of that text, or helping you out like with creative input, or like turning like your sloppy prose into something that sounds a little bit better, of course, right? So in that respect, I don't think like that they will tackle this problem right now. And I think like their biggest problem will be that of understanding how to take like this amazing technology that they've built and turn it into a product that could target different sort of like strata of the market. So that for me like is their biggest challenge beyond the amazing technology that they've built.
Yeah. And speaking of turning this into a product or turning it into something useful, do you have any thoughts on what this will look like in the music space for us? How far are we from having a DALL-E or a ChatGPT that's specifically geared towards audio?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is something like that I've been thinking about like for quite some time now. But many of the people in the audience might have seen a couple of models, creative music AI models that have sort of like come out over the last couple of months or so. One being dance diffusion, and the other one being riff fusion, right? Like riffing in guitars, right? And they use this relatively novel technology used in image processing and image generation, really called like a diffusion model, and they adapt it to generate music directly from audio. Well, it's not really audio, but from like spectrograms, right? So they convert a audio time series, raw audio, into a spectrogram using a Fourier transform, and then they use that image and they interpret it, or like at least like to train the models as if like this audio file was just yet another image, right? And so refusion and dance diffusion think of music as an image, and they don't know anything about music, but they know quite a lot about generating images. So they see this spectrogram, which is just like a 2D representation of music or audio sound in general, where on the x-axis you have time, on the y-axis you have a frequency, and then having like this 2D matrix, you also have sort of like the intensity of the energy for each beam that you have like at a given frequency and at a given time, right? And it just like generates more images, more spectrograms like this. The great thing about like this approach is that you can train the model passing also tags, right? So you say, okay, I have all of this music. So I have like some music by Michael Jackson. I have some music by Pink Floyd. I have some music by Chopin. For the music by Chopin, I say, yeah, this is classical music. This is in a minor mood, or I don't know. For the music by Pink Floyd, yeah, this is progressive rock, or this is psychedelic rock, right? So the model not only learns how to generate music, but it also associates the different spectrograms that it receives with semantic descriptors. The great thing about this is that then when you are at inference time, when you are at generation time, you can tell the model what type of music you want. So I want some Pink Floyd music with clarinet, for example, right? And then the model should hopefully generate something that more or less makes sense. We have a couple of early examples with refusion and dance diffusion. The results are not fantastic, but they are super impressive if you think that the model doesn't know anything about music. It only knows about spectrograms. And that is like quite something I have to say. Now, there are loads and loads of limitations, and I see many of this. Main limitation is sort of like the duration of the amount of music generated, which is 1-2 bars, not more than that. You can chain a lot of like sort of like beats of music generated by the model, because all you do basically is you live like in a latent space, and you can sample points within a latent space that then get generated. So if you sample points that are close enough, then you tend to get like music that sounds basically the same, with slight differences. It could be like in pitch, it could be in timbre, it could be like in harmony, whatever, right? But they're similar enough. So if you chain music that's been sampled very close in the latent space, then you may get something that more or less makes sense, but it really doesn't make sense. And this is one of the biggest problems that we have right now in generative music, which is that at a very sort of like small scale, small resolution, we do things, we generate things that more or less make sense. But then when we zoom out and we try to look at the overall trajectory of the music, there we have big problems, because these models are not capable of understanding the overall musical structure. This is one of the big limitations that we have right now with deep generative music. And again, here we have to talk about like a distinction between two ways of generating music, one being audio-based or spectrogram-based, and this is the models like refusion or dance diffusion, and then the other approach, more sort of like conservative, and the one that I prefer, which is generating music from symbols. So using like a symbolic representation like MIDI, music XML, or whatever like a representation you may want to have. You have symbols and you manipulate those symbols rather than working with raw unstructured data like audio or spectrograms. Now, the other approach, the symbolic based, even with deep generative models, has the capacity to generate things that are a little bit more coherent at a larger scale, up to a phrase level, I would say, like say 8, 16, 32 bars, something like that. And but even there's a big problem to go like to the next level, which is sort of like chaining together many phrases in order to create like a piece of music that makes sense and has ebbs and flows of tension. And for that, the only way forward that I say is combining together deep learning, machine learning on the one hand, and sort of like constraining its wilderness through symbolic reasoning and music theory. Unless you do that, you just have like cool toys that you can use as building blocks for sure. And for creatives, that is going to be like super cool. For example, if you can create small loops, small one shots, and things like that. But you're not going to be able to create entire pieces without injecting information about music theory, most likely.
Got it. So it sounds like a never-ending song
Oh
that
yeah, it is.
sounds a bit like the source material.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds great. Um, and what I was going to ask you what your thoughts are around the ethics of training a model on copyrighted art and data. I'm sure that's a question that's come up quite commonly, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
It's a difficult one. It's a really, really difficult one. On the one hand, I think there should be some sort of acknowledgement for people, the artists, the writers, whose sort of like products a certain model has been trained on, for sure. On the other, I like to think about a parallelism between how we train a model and how we learn as human beings. If you take like a composer, for example, right? Say Schoenberg, right? Arnold Schoenberg. Okay, so Joe Cacophony, like beginning of the 20th century. So, and this Austrian guy was able to basically revolutionize the way we think of music. And in a sense, we can think of him as the father of contemporary art music, like very complex music, which a lot of theory, stuff like that. But if Schoenberg did what he did, it was because of the sort of like hic et nunc. So basically the circumstances, the context where he lived, and the music he had been exposed to at that point. There is no Schoenberg without the late string quartets by Beethoven, without Wagner, right? So in a sense, Schoenberg has been trained his whole life through exposure to some of these great artists of the past. And he's learned and he's internalized many of the grammars used by like this fantastic artist of previous generations in order to create music that then was completely disruptive, right? But without like the history of contemporary or classical music, there wouldn't be any Schoenberg, because it's just like not possible now. And in a sense, I think like when we train a model, we do something similar, right? Because we're just exposing the model to a lot of music, to a lot of text, to a lot of literature, to a lot of paintings, right? Of course, the scale is completely different because we can feed billions musical pieces of spectrograms or paintings to a system like a diffusion model or ChatGPT, right? And this would be like quite difficult for a human being to do. But in a sense, we're doing something similar, right? We learn from the past, and then we generate things based off what we've heard, what we've seen, and we use some sort of like recombination of many of those ideas, of concepts together to create something that hopefully will sound a little bit new. And so we just move the sort of like horizon of music creativity or music a little bit further because of what we've been exposed to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. So we have a couple questions from the audience. So one question is, this is piping the results from one online service to a different online service. Do you know what the what the latency of the system is. I suppose that would depend on how many people are using ChatGPT at a time. Do you happen to know anything about?
Yeah, it really depends also like on the text input, right? So if you ask a question that is difficult, like for ChatGPT to reply to it, and it's going to take some time. But usually the amount of latency is comparable to the amount of latency or the amount of time that you have to wait when you are interacting directly with ChatGPT. So it takes time like to generate like the whole response, and it's the same thing for profit. You yes, sending the information is really quick. Receiving back the information is super quick. The problem is the generation part. It can take like up to, I don't know, like 15, 20 seconds. Really depends on the question as well.
Great. We have a question from Togrol, who asks, do you think the closed box approach of AI makes people less curious about understanding and finding a mathematical or deterministic relationship in between facts? I'm not sure if I understand that question, but maybe you do.
Yes. So I think the uh, what he or she was saying is basically that the moment we start working with deep learning, machine learning, but especially deep learning models, like large models, we sort of like lose the deterministic understanding. So we don't explain things through equations or through like rules or stuff like that, but just like we use like super powerful statistics that does the work for us. And then we have a black box. We have no idea how that black box works. And we use it just because it works. Now, this is a huge, huge problem, not necessarily in music generation, I would argue, because at the end of the day, yeah, we're talking about like things like that are within like the entertainment field, right? So there's most of the time people are not going to die because we generate some music and we don't know how that music has been generated. But for other application, knowing how a model has arrived at a certain decision or at a certain product is paramount. Think of medical diagnosis, for example, right? There are many systems that already work better than human beings at diagnosing, I don't know, like cancer, like melanoma, or other things, but we don't know why and how. And that is a big problem. That is a big no-go. So in that respect, there's a whole chapter within the deep learning field right now that's called explainable AI. So they try to understand how these huge neural networks arrive at a certain decision through understanding like how the model works in trying to convert statistics into something that is understandable for us, for human beings, into symbols that make sense for our brains, right? And that is one thing. But the question wasn't really that. The question was more about, but does the black box approach mean that we as humans lose interest in the mathematics behind the explanation of the world? And I would say, yeah, for many people, that's the case. And I've seen it happening time and again, because for the majority of music tech or road tech companies that I consult, like the thought is always the same. Okay, so we have this problem. We don't need really to understand how to solve it, but we're just going to throw some machine learning or some deep learning to it, and hopefully like that'll figure out by itself. This is a completely I would say like unsafe approach, I would say, for once. And then at the same time, I think you have to try to understand the world through mathematics and through things that are explainable as much as possible. And deep learning, black boxy approaches should be the last resort. Right.
Great. And N. Dawson asks, with the exception of the ChatGPT call, are any other libraries making external calls from the code for profit?
External calls. Yes, there is one that does an external call to Google text to speech. Yeah. So you
Great.
get back to text from ChatGPT, and then you send it to Google Cloud text to speech. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And looks like that's all of the questions. If anybody else has any other questions, I'll give you a couple more seconds while I'm making this outro. Valerio, thank you very much
Thank you, Josh.
for that talk. Once again, be sure to check out his YouTube channel. It's really fantastic for AI and audio. It's called The Sound of AI. He also has a consultancy as well, that where he consults companies on all matters of AI and audio. And with that, thank you very much, Valerio, and
Thank you, Josh.
really appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks a lot.
Great. So while we're in this, and Valerio has to get going, it's a little bit late in Spain. So thank you once again, Valerio. Really cool.
Thank you.
Um,
Take care.
take care now.
Bye-bye.